Sonic the Hedgehog is very special to me. We all had our obsessions for certain things when we were kids. I myself had quite a few, but none of them were as important to my identity as an 8-year-old as this funny blue guy. But now where I differ from most Sonic fans is that I didn't grow up playing any of these so-called greats. You know, some Sonic games are hated, most are mixed, and a few are, by and large, loved. But I mostly grew up playing Sonic games in this ballpark. Mostly because I was a Nintendo-only kid, but after the GameCube era, so I missed out on this, and the best I got was usually this. And as time went on, and I grew up to have a slightly more refined taste in video games, let's just say Sonic Lost World on the 3DS wasn't really cutting it anymore. So I dropped the series for a good few years thinking I'd never care for it again, until Mania came out, and I decided to buy it on a whim. I kind of hated it at first because I'd never played a classic Sonic game before, and I kept running into stuff and generally just being really bad at it, but at some point it all clicked, and I loved it, and my love for Sonic was back, and everything made sense, and then I had to get therapy 3 months later. So yeah, that streak of Sonic being good again didn't last that long, but it sparked a fire in my heart for the blue guy that's still going strong to this day. The reason why I'm going into all of this is because Sonic Frontiers came out last year, and I realized that despite me having gotten back into the series for a while now, I had never really bothered to share my thoughts on it with others. And man, do I have a lot of stuff to say about it. This is also where I take a pledge to try my hardest to avoid regurgitating years of Sonic discourse back at you. I have some unique points to make here. With that being said, we're going to be talking about classic Sonic, the two main relevant 3D formulas, what Sonic Frontiers takes from them, and how the future of the series is looking like right now. And before we get into the Sonic stuff proper, I want to set up a little concept that'll come in handy for the rest of the video. So let's get on to that. And the concept we're going to be talking about is depth, specifically in the context of platformers. But this upcoming definition kind of applies to any type of game, so here it is. Depth is determined by the amount of viable options that you have available at any given moment while playing a game. For example, let's look at Mario 64. Mario's movement options allow players to tackle the same set of obstacles in different ways. Sure, you could be a total lame-o that goes up the bridge and Bob-omb Battlefield the normal way, or your parents could be proud of you. Like, I don't play this game the same way I did when I was 5 years old. I used to just run up the normal way and be scared of the chain chomp. But now I do stuff like this and this every time I pick up the game. And it's all because of the viable movement options you have at your disposal that allow for player expression and vastly raise the potential skill ceiling. This is what gives a game depth. But now we're going to talk about the very opposite side of the spectrum, okay? These two are at odds, and we're going to call these precision platformers, because these games are more about very tightly designed challenges rather than going for the depth that allows for player expression that I just mentioned. I say this because going back to my definition of depth, it's all about the amount of viable options you have available at any given moment. Let's take Crash Bandicoot for example. How many options do you have to get across this chasm? Well, only one, to jump. And there's nothing really wrong with that. In fact, if we were to place Mario in here, we'd immediately have a very big problem. Because he has way too many viable options, and so you don't have to be precise with that one jump anymore. Because you simply have other options that are better now. You could long jump, triple jump, dive, all taking away from the element of precision that was there before. You can't focus on one without partly sacrificing the other. But now you might be saying, Johnny pal, buddy friend. I believe that comparison you're making is unfair, given that this level was designed around Crash's moveset and not Mario's. So of course, if you put a character that wasn't designed for that stage, you're gonna end up trivializing most of the obstacles there. But that doesn't mean you can't have both. Just make a stage designed around Mario's expensive moveset that asks for precision while fully utilizing said moveset, and boom, now you have both. And to that I say, okay, let's say we do make a stage specifically designed around Mario's moveset, and we try to put in obstacles that ask the player to use a specific move from your moveset for each obstacle, so that no move goes unused. And now we have all the same options as before, so we have depth and obstacles that ask for precision, right? Therefore you can have both. Well, not really, because going back to my definition of depth, again, there's a key word here, and that is viable options, okay? Viable. When you make obstacles that are designed to only be overcome in one specific way, your other viable options, well, stop being viable anymore because you can only do it in that one way. Therefore, you don't have player expression anymore. And I know it sounds like I'm presenting these two as if one was objectively the correct way to make a game, but I'm not trying to say that, because just as you compromise depth and player expression when you focus on precision, you also compromise precision and very tightly designed challenges when you focus on depth. Having said that, I personally have a pretty big bias towards depth, but I still really like some games that focus on precision. It's just that depth is where my heart really lies. And now that we properly set up both of these terms, we can finally tie it all back to Sonic. So, yeah, this is where I was going all along. It might seem weird, but I want to start by going over the boost formula first and why I think it falls into the precision category. So, since these levels are made up of long linear hallways and boosting makes it so that you automatically get to near top speed and kill enemies upon contact, some detractors of the formula say that it is too automated and that the game plays itself. Add on to that there's a few times where the designers rely on stuff like dash pads and springs as a crutch and make one lead right into the other, taking control away for a little too long, and yeah, I can see where the sentiment is coming from. But to call it automated is a little disingenuous. There's a reason why certain sacrifices were made here. There's a reason why in this game you steer Sonic left and right more than outright freely controlling him, and why the levels are mostly made up of straight narrow hallways. It's all to achieve this unparalleled sense of speed, to be left in awe at the beautiful environments and how fast you're running through them, all the while having to react to things coming at you at a little over 9 times the speed of light. The way I'd categorize this general style of gameplay is obstacle course Sonic. Not to imply there weren't obstacles before, but the focus here is in crafting a tight, fast-paced, and precise challenge. It's not about having 3 different ways to get around this wall, it's about having half a second to react appropriately to it and be rewarded for it. And again, while I generally prefer depth over precision, Unleashed knows very well what it wants to be and excels at it. Moving on to Sonic Adventure. This one, on the other hand, might initially make you scratch your head because by my own definition of depth and viable options, it seemingly doesn't really fit. I mean, with Mario you have this whole moveset to work with that opens up all these options, but Sonic here has basically only one extra movement options besides just jumping, that being the spin dash. So, how could this game possibly have much depth at all with just that one move? Well, that might just be one move, but that one move completely recontextualizes the way you look at the environment around you, because it's not just about jumping at the right time to get on a rail or doing a homing attack chain to get to the faster route. It's about figuring out that faster route yourself by experimenting with the spin dash and observing the terrain around you. There's 1,000 different ways to get through these levels just hidden in plain sight. In fact, while writing this video, I decided to watch a Sonic Adventure speedrun, and they do a jump here in the first level that I never really thought about, because I'd never really connected the dots that, oh, these two areas are that close to each other. And the game is just full of little moments like this that you can optimize to go faster. And also, you might have noticed, Adventure 1 doesn't really have that many splitting paths with faster routes. I mean, there are some here and there, don't get me wrong, but unlike Boost, they aren't used as a crutch for the level design. The levels themselves are more like semi-open spaces where you yourself have to figure out how to optimize them to go faster. So to get the most out of the mechanics and go as fast as you possibly can, you need to 1. Master the physics of the spin dash, 2. Observe the terrain around you and figure out how to take advantage of it, and 3. Memorize the level. But let's put a pin on that because now I want to talk about a slight misconception that's been haunting Sonic discourse for years, and yeah, it's momentum. To put it bluntly, I do not believe there has ever been an official momentum-based 3D Sonic game. Before I explain why none of these are momentum-based, let me explain what I think is. Classic Sonic. In these games, Sonic can be in 2 relevant states, running or rolling. Running applies a set amount of constant momentum forward, while rolling just kind of leaves you at the mercy of the terrain you're standing on. But the upside to it is, let's say you were to run down a steep hill. Sure, you'd gain some speed from that, but if you were to roll down that steep hill instead, you would gain a lot more speed because the speed cap for rolling is higher than that of running. But in a opposite scenario, let's say you're going up a hill, you would then be much better off running up a hill than rolling up it, because by rolling you'd lose a lot more speed given that rolling doesn't apply constant momentum forward by itself, unlike running. So speed is not something that's just given to you really. Most of the time you have to earn it, and then there's the challenge of knowing enough of the level to make sure you don't run straight into an enemy or into a pit, so keeping that speed is also a challenge in and of itself. And on that point, I believe that to be called a true momentum-based game, your main gameplay loop must consist of two alternating states, which are, as I mentioned, gaining speed and maintaining speed. If you have access to an almost instant boost of speed that gets you near your top speed or outright to your top speed, then that trivializes the concept of either gaining or maintaining speed, because A, you can gain the speed instantly, and B, if you were to suddenly lose that speed, well, again, you can just get it right back. And before a genius comes down to my comment section saying, did this guy forget about spin dashing in classic Sonic? That's a boost of speed you can do anywhere. And to that I say, there's a huge difference between a boost of speed you can do while moving that gets you to top speed, and a boost of speed that you can only do while being completely stationary that doesn't get you even near your top speed, okay? Now, momentum is technically in these games. When people say adventure is momentum based, they usually mean stuff like if you spin dash and jump, you carry your momentum into the air. And also they mention how if you roll down a hill, you go faster than running down it, but the times in which you can actually take advantage of that specifically are very few and far between. This is simply not a main part of the gameplay loop. The reason why I'm going into all of this is because I've made a few key observations that I find interesting when put together. So, pay attention, class. 1. Some people call Sonic Adventure 1 momentum-based, despite it clearly not using momentum like the classics did at all. Second, some people call Sonic Adventure 1 the closest 3D Sonic has gotten to the classics, and I will be framing my third observation as a quick question. What would be the difference if, let's say, we have two Sonics? One is rolling down a steep hill, therefore he's going faster than if he was just running, and the other is boosting down the hill, therefore he's also going faster than if he was just running. And well, the correct answer is there would be no difference. Where the true difference lies between these two mechanics that give you a boost of speed is a little something I like to call context sensitivity. This is what you people actually want. And when I say you people, I mean specifically the ones that love stuff like Sonic Adventure and claim that ideally for them, they'd like momentum to be in their Sonic games. What I'm trying to do here is narrow down the thing you're asking for to be something more concrete. So, what do I mean by context sensitivity? Well, what I mean is that you want a mechanic whose result changes depending on the context of where you use it. For example, all of classic Sonic is built upon this idea, as I explained earlier. If you roll on flat ground, the only thing that'll happen is that you'll slow down, but if you roll downhill, you'll gain more speed. It's the same action, but the outcome is changed by the context. The context here being the ground. This is the difference between it and boost. Both are functionally supposed to give the player a boost of speed, but boost can be done anywhere regardless of where you're standing, while the boost of speed that rolling gives you depends on the context. And now you might be saying, well, you can spin dash anywhere, anytime in Sonic Adventure 1, so why is that supposedly closer to the classics? While it might not function exactly as it did in the classics, the spin dash here is a really context-sensitive mechanic as well. As we went over earlier, the mileage you get out of the spin dash depends on the terrain you're standing on. Now, if you have a context-sensitive mechanic, it goes without saying that how much you can get out of it will depend on how much the context allows you to get out of it. Sonic Adventure 1's levels are made in such a way that areas either overlap or exist within close proximity of each other, allowing for proper utilization of the mechanics. Sonic Adventure 2, on the other hand, doesn't really do this. For one, the spin dash was considerably nerfed, and the levels here don't overlap, areas don't exist close to each other anymore. These levels are straight hallways that don't allow the players to take advantage of the mechanics even half as much as Adventure 1 did. It uses the foundation of a game made for a level of depth and player expression, but has level design that leans much more into the precision and obstacle course end of the spectrum that we went over earlier. And as a result, I just don't feel like Sonic Adventure 2 takes advantage of either end. I mentioned how Boost knew what it wanted to be from the get-go and took advantage of it, and I would say the same thing for Adventure 1. But 2 is just this awkward middle ground that doesn't really excel at anything. But going back to what I was saying, context sensitivity was the one through line I could find between Adventure and Classic. I mean, if you think about what you need to do to go as fast as possible in the Classics, there's 3 main things. So, 1, master the physics and controls. 2, constantly observe the terrain to see how you can take advantage of it. And 3, memorize the level. Do any of these ring a bell? Momentum is not the thing these two have in common. It's those shared baseline characteristics that give depth to both the Classics and Adventure, and that's why Adventure is called the closest thing there is to the classics by a lot of people, myself included. Since the foundation of good performance in both games depends on the player's mastery of a context-sensitive mechanic, as well as a deep familiarity with the level layout itself, Sonic Adventure manages to translate some of the essence and charm of the classics into 3D, while also bringing its own unique charm and identity into things. There's so much about Sonic's current identity, music, cast of characters that is owed almost entirely to how bold and creative Sonic Adventure 1 was at the time. I don't think any game in the series since Adventure has ever been as ambitious of a leap forward for the series, while also juggling having to be a faithful and recognizable new entry to the Sonic series. So yeah, maybe my enthusiasm gave it away, but this is my favorite Sonic game. Having said all that, I want to move on to what is technically the main topic of the video. I want to start by talking about everything this game did wrong, including some stuff that as of today has been fixed by the updates. So, if you've only played the Sonic Adventure games and then pick up Boost, you could immediately tell this is not the same. This Sonic is very different. If you've played any other 3D Sonic game before and then pick up Lost World, you could immediately tell this is very different. And I don't mean just by the level design, although that's important too. I mean before even getting into the specific movesets and abilities unique to each iteration, you can tell just with the way each Sonic handles, with the way they move, you can tell they were tailor-made for the needs of each individual formula. Because when you come up with a new formula, you can't just take exactly what came before, plop it in a new environment, and expect good results. Because you'd have two different elements fighting each other, two different pieces that were never meant to fit. That's why when you make a new formula, you ideally need to start from scratch, lest you end up with a formula made for one thing while in practice trying to achieve another and exceeding at nothing. I don't know if it was for budget reasons, time issues, or something else, but for their new open zone formula, Sonic Team decided to use another formula as a foundation. I thought this was a bad idea for the reasons I just stated, but if it had to be, then so be it. Now, which formula did they choose to be a foundation for an, I repeat, open zone Sonic game? Why, of course, Boost! Sonic Team consciously chose a formula that sits on the exact opposite end of the spectrum they should have been shooting for. Linear obstacle courses is not the foundation you want for your open zone Sonic game. You know, one where you supposedly want to encourage freedom, exploration, maybe even going left and right every now and then too. And their solution to this fundamental clash of game design was that instead of doing what I just mentioned and making a new foundation for this formula specifically, they basically chopped up what would be a boost level before and randomly spread bits and pieces of it around the map, so you just have floating rails, springs, and dash pads scattered around in a very generic open area. I say generic because 1, it doesn't look like a Sonic area, it just looks like a real life, and 2, clearly nothing about the actual lay of the land was made with Sonic in mind either. Since Sonic is tethered to the ground while running, you can't really launch yourself into the air by running off of a steep hill, and even if you did jump while boosting, let's say, Sonic Team made it so that jumping would completely take away the momentum you had going, so you couldn't carry it into the air. The end result was that there's nothing really engaging about running around in the actual open area itself, because you couldn't take advantage of it in any way. There's no substance to this space at all. So the actual meat and potatoes of your engaging gameplay existed solely on the floating obstacle courses. The world itself basically was no more than a middle point between one obstacle course to the next, which at that point, why even have an open zone? Just make the whole thing an obstacle course and oh no, we're right back to the beginning. To make things a little worse, they were doing that classic Sonic Team move of, well, we're doing something new, but we're not really confident that alone can carry the game, so we're gonna cram in some mediocre side content and stuff that has worked in the past, and ha ha ha, hope that helps. To progress in this game, you need keys to unlock the Chaos Emerald Vaults, and there's 2 ways to get keys. One is to either play the awful cyberspace levels where Sonic handles way worse than he does in the open zone, so akin to how he handled in Sonic Forces, and the other way to get keys is by, fishing. You can go fishing. This mode has a good music playing, and it's not playing Sonic Forces, so I did this for most of the game and played around 5 cyberspace stages at most. Now mind you, I didn't really want to do either, but again, you need to engage with this content if you wanted to progress. So yeah, to put it mildly, this game was a mess. Conceptually flawed even. But there were also things I really liked about it. For example, Frontiers lets you completely fine-tune Sonic's controls to your liking. You can change your starting speed, initial boost speed, turning speed, boost turning speed, top speed, and just there were so many settings that while yes, we technically started with the same Sonic that was there in Forces, he's unrecognizable after a few tweaks. And also, you know the Sonic writers that we've had since Scholars? The ones that wrote the "Baldy nose hair" line and were hated by most of the fandom? The ones that admit to knowing nothing about the series and characters and only checking Wikipedia and a few clips before writing for the games? Yeah, those guys? Fired. Now, Sonic Team hired a writer that had actual experience and care for the character, having worked on Archie and IDW Sonic comics before, and you can tell, not only by how the characters are properly written again, but it's like the history that had been ignored and erased for years suddenly actually all happened now. Sonic constantly references events and places from previous games, and for some people it got to be a bit much, but after going for years of Sonic history being completely ignored, it's nice seeing that, hey, there is some through line between these games. Sonic and friends did in fact actually go on these adventures, and they remember them. And there's also these Eggman voice note thingies that you can fish out, and all of them are great. I highly recommend giving them a listen. And finally, there's some other aspects like Sonic trying to be cool again. The Titan fights are mechanically pretty shallow, and the mileage you get out of them here depends almost entirely on the level you have going into the fights, because you can either be very overpowered and it's over too quickly, or very underpowered and it goes on forever. But man, if these don't go really hard. Everything about these just feels like they're trying to tap into that early 2000s PG-13 edginess again, and I love it. But despite all those positive aspects, they weren't enough to make the actual game fun for me. Sure, they were really neat, and I appreciated them, but they wouldn't just magically make the game fun. But there was one thing that did. As I mentioned earlier, Sonic Team made it so that jumping while running killed your momentum. So if you were looking forward to getting into some Sonic Adventure spin-dash-jump type shenanigans to do some sick skips, then you weren't in luck. Except actually there's this little thing in the game called rail launching. Turns out, jumping while grinding on rails does fully keep your momentum, so if you were to jump while boosting on a rail... This changed the game for me. There's this one swirly rail in the second island that's right in front of a long chasm that I always remember when thinking about rail launching, because it was the first time after just having heard about it, I decided, okay, let's try to exploit this, let's see what I can do with it. And I did this. It's not like this jump itself saved me minutes of playtime or as if the proper way to get there was too laborious either, but it made it so that my moment-to-moment gameplay was just that much more engaging. I'd actively be paying attention to my surroundings and all the rails around to see what kinds of crazy stuff I could do next. There were times while playing this game where I just got in the zone and started chaining around rail launches. I'd hop from one to the next, snatching memory tokens, while completely skipping their respective obstacle courses. I tried to optimize my movement throughout the island. It stopped being about do this little challenge in the precise way we want and move on to the next. It didn't only give me something to master, but something to experiment with, something I could push myself in, something that would change depending on the angle of the rail itself and what was around it. It gave some depth to the experience. And something that made this even better was that one of the many busy work checklist sort of activities in this open zone is finding these little question mark thingies that fill up your map. You do that by doing really easy puzzles or challenges like jumping the rope, hitting the ball through the hoop, dumb stuff like that. But when you unlock two of these that are near each other, that would create a rail path between them that wasn't there before. This made traversal even faster. There's some areas that maybe are a bit of a pain to get around, but by unlocking rails there, you'd make traversal there much faster. And placing these rails all over the map made it so that you would constantly be increasing your options for getting around. Basically, while the context itself was highly limiting, given that the context here is rails instead of all of the ground as it used to be, it was still a context-sensitive mechanic that let me push myself, try out new things, and overall just have a lot more fun. It is no exaggeration when I say that without this mechanic, Sonic Frontiers would be down there as one of my least favorite Sonic games. But there's one mechanic I enjoyed permeated almost the entire experience because rails are, well, everywhere. So it ended up salvaging what would have been a pretty bad game and made it into something I could get some enjoyment out of. But even then, there are two sides to this. On one hand, rail launching might have not been put there intentionally, but it was intentionally left in. I mean, right when the game came out, they posted a video of tips and tricks on the official Sonic YouTube channel where they themselves name it rail launching and encourage players to take advantage of it.
We're calling this move rail launching. With this, you can use both your speed and momentum to take massive shortcuts and easily get to higher areas.
They certainly didn't consciously put it into the game, but they saw enough value in this accidental mechanic to not only keep it in, but encourage players to take advantage of it. This in itself gave me some hope. But on the other hand, the fact that my favorite mechanic was basically a complete fluke didn't inspire much more hope in Sonic Team at the time. And while rail launching is cool and all, the game had 3 big issues that were really holding it back for me. First, and the most important one, the lack of substance in the open area itself. I mentioned earlier before that a big issue for me was that there's nothing engaging about the actual open zone itself, and just to clear up what I mean by that, in case anyone is lost, is that unlike the classics and adventure, the terrain is not something you have to actively take into account or take advantage of, because there's no context-sensitive mechanic that lets you take advantage of it. This was especially bad given that Frontiers, unlike classic and adventure, is an open zone. You could make the argument that no other formula could benefit more from or outright needs it more than open zone, because just by virtue of being open, it's a better fit for player expression, given that players aren't bound to one path. So the context was kind of there, but there was no mechanic to let you take advantage of it at all. Now the second issue, not as big but still bad, cyberspace. To keep things brief, Sonic here felt noticeably slower and more unwieldy than he did in the open zones. He basically handled like he did in Forces, and I didn't enjoy these stages whatsoever because of it. There was another unintended mechanic here called homing dash, also mentioned in that video from earlier, but it was too situational and just not there enough to save cyberspace for me. And to make things a little worse, a good chunk of the cyberspace levels were 2D, and the physics, while in a 2D perspective, are even worse than in normal cyberspace, because you somehow go even slower and it's awful. And speaking about Force 2D, let me get into my final third issue, the third island. You know all the obstacle courses scattered around all over the island? Wouldn't it be a shame if over half of them forced you into a 2D perspective all the time? Like imagine just running into an obstacle course because you wanted to take advantage of a rail, or maybe you accidentally bumped into a dash pad or spring, and suddenly you find yourself locked in a 2D section that you either have to slowly back out of or resign yourself to it and just complete it. The third island is full of these, they're absolutely everywhere. Thankfully by Island 4 this issue mostly goes away somehow, but this one island was very painful to get through because of that. At the end of the day, while I liked Sonic Frontiers, I didn't end up going through with the review I was going to make, because it was tough trying to be really hopeful and optimistic about Sonic Team and this formula when it had all these glaring issues, and the one thing I really liked about Frontiers could have potentially just been a fluke. But then, Sonic Team impressed me. For those unaware, Sonic Team announced that they would be giving another full year of support to Frontiers, with DLC coming in content waves throughout 2023. Update 1 was not much to write home about. Cyberspace challenges, boss rush mode, a photo mode, and a jukebox that lets you listen to some fan favorite tracks while running around. You know, all good stuff, especially considering it was a free update, but nothing crazy. Update 2 on the other hand was something huge. You might be thinking, what could they have possibly added in a free update no less, which isn't even the big update of this whole thing, by the way, that one's wave 3, and it's not even out at the time of writing this. What could a measly second wave have done? Well, what used to be my vague hopes for this team were that since they saw the value in something like rail launching, and most people were complaining about jump skilling or momentum, I was hoping that maybe by the next game they could listen to us, and maybe even tap more into the depth that these sort of mechanics bring, to finally give us an open zone Sonic game with a context-sensitive mechanic. That was the dream. I was thinking that at best, maybe the next game wouldn't have jump deceleration. Well, Update 2 came in and added a slider for jump deceleration so that you can turn it off and keep your momentum when you jump now. Like, this was the most requested feature by far, and Sonic Team just nonchalantly dropped it for free in Update 2. They were, in fact, listening. The jump deceleration thing alone would have been a huge game changer, okay? That alone would have given me the push to make the video you're watching right now. But they also added this little thing called the spin dash. You ever heard of this thing? Yeah, It's in here now. It doesn't function exactly how it did in Adventure 1, but man if it isn't just as dumb fun and broken as it ever was. Basically, the spin dash now functions as a sort of alternative boost. Hold L2 while moving and you do the spin dash, which gives you a boost of speed. But there are two major things that make it different from a normal boost. First is that the initial speed is noticeably much faster than the boost. But more importantly, second, you are not stuck to the ground at all anymore. The terrain went from something I never even looked at and tried to avoid to something I'm constantly observing and trying to take advantage of. You see that hill right there? That hill that meant nothing to me before, that held no value, that brought nothing of substance to the game? Not anymore. Now it lets me do this. And this doesn't take away from rail launching either, because by virtue of them being suspended way up in the sky, there's still certain jumps you can only make with them. In fact, now there's a sort of synergy between the two mechanics that just keeps the flow of gameplay going. Before, all that needed to happen for you to get knocked out of the zone was to miss a rail, or maybe there was no rail around. But now, no matter where you are, there's sure to be something that you can shoot yourself off of that'll keep things going. And to a degree, the spin dash also improves some combat encounters like Ashura, for example. Because before, your main option was to wait around until it hit the ground so you could get on its arm. But now you can just spin dash up a hill, turn around, and get on the guy. And if you remember, I had another big issue with the game, which was forcing me to either fish or play a boost level with terrible Sonic Forces physics. And you kind of still do, but now without jump deceleration and with the spin dash, this is just... You know what? Let me just show you a few clips instead. This does not really fix the 2D only levels, but this basically not only fixed around 50% of that side content I couldn't care less about before, and made it actually fun. Again, it doesn't function exactly like Adventure, but the way you can break these levels after just a few well-placed jumps and spin dashes, well, it's something I hadn't felt since. And remember that third island I mentioned earlier, the one full of forced 2D sections? Well, that's not really fixed, those are still there, but now you can pretty reliably move around and do skips without having to engage with those obstacle courses, thanks to the spin dash and jump deceleration being off. I'm sorry if it has felt like I've just been gushing about the game ever since I started talking about Update 2, but it did considerably lessen most of my major issues. Like, it's still not quite what it should be. Island 2, for example, has a lot of flat terrain that doesn't really let you take advantage of the spin dash even half as much as the other islands. Some cyberspace levels are pretty fun now, but a good chunk of them still feel as bad to play as they ever did, and while the new additions have made Island 3's big issues easier to maneuver around, I shouldn't even have to do that to begin with. But what really matters here is that these changes were not arbitrary. It's clear as day to me that all of them are here to address a fundamental issue with the game. In essence, it basically had the same issue I criticized Sonic Adventure 2 for, but the roles have been switched. Remember how earlier I mentioned that Sonic Adventure 2 took a foundation that was made for player expression and depth, and through the level design forced a precision-based obstacle course game out of it? Well, Sonic Frontiers is that, but the other way around. The open zone concept naturally works well with depth because it encourages freedom in player expression. Using boost as a foundation and putting a bunch of linear obstacle courses in an open zone was where this fundamental clash was at. Those two things not only don't benefit each other at all, they actively work against each other. And all these new new changes and additions, plus the fact that relaunching was left there in the first place, makes it obvious to me that Sonic Team has tried course correcting pretty hard after noticing this problem. When you look at the characteristics of the spin dash, such as it has a considerably higher initial speed than the boost, but then it drops below that of what would be the standard boost speed, meaning only the initial part of the spin dash is particularly beneficial, or how the main difference between it and the boost is that Sonic is not stuck to the ground anymore, and then you add on to that there's only really one reason to remove jump deceleration, and it becomes obvious how all of these changes and additions have been explicitly straying away from precision and leaning into depth as hard as they could. I know this might seem rather abrupt at this moment, but what was the point of this video? Well, for starters, I wanted to throw my head in the ring and talk about the mainline formulas the series has seen to better be able to understand what makes certain groups like certain games. I think recognizing the qualities that make us like something, noticing a pattern, giving them a definition, making them something tangible, will help us understand our own tastes better and be able to communicate our thoughts to other people more efficiently. That's why I went into the whole depth versus precision and context sensitivity thing, because at the very least it helped myself to further understand what makes me prefer certain Sonic games over others, even helping me to properly put those vague thoughts and feelings into words about why I might really like one game and dislike another, despite the two being really similar at the surface level. And the second reason why I made this video is because Sonic means quite a bit to me. This blue guy defined most of my childhood, and for a very long time I couldn't genuinely look forward to anything this series had in store anymore, because a new Sonic game was something to dread more than something to look forward to. But Frontiers changed that. Sonic Team, for the first time in a very long time, is not only recognizing their own mistakes and trying their hardest to correct them, but they've been explicitly listening to the fans. Now, you might not like that if you hate the fans, but my wider point here is that Sonic Team very clearly cares again. Just looking at what the free DLC has added and is looking to add, plus seeing how Morio Kishimoto himself constantly interacts with fans on Twitter and hears them out, it's pretty clear to me that Sonic Team knows what kinds of games they want to make now and what kind of games we want to play. They definitely didn't know back when they started development on Frontiers, but the passion they have for making Sonic great again, that drive to bring him back to what he used to be, is very clear to me now. Is it clear to you? Anyways, please don't leave yet, for I still have a few things to say, and before I even say any of that, thank you so much for watching this video. So, I know YouTubers constantly say this without really meaning it, but I genuinely love to see what people think about, well, any of the things I went over today. If you have anything you'd like to comment, make sure to leave it down below, and I will make sure to read it. And finally, if you liked the video, consider subscribing to the channel. I know my track record looks pretty bad right now, but I promise to never take leaves like that again. This channel will never be my main focus in life, but it is something that I care about quite a bit, and I'd like to be much more consistent with it. That being said, again, thank you so much for watching, and yeah, see you next time.